Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Haley Spierbauer. Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to our next guest. She is on the other side of the world from me. It is her morning and my night, and yet we are so connected by the work that we do, and I feel so honored to have her on the podcast today. We have Dr. Eddie Blass, the founder and CEO of the Inventorium. Welcome, Eddie. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, and thank you so much for having me today.
I greeted you by saying good morning. It is very much the morning for you, and it is very much ending towards the evening for me. And I'm so excited because when we met, we had a deep connection about the work we do and why we do it. So I'm eager for you to share all of that work that you're focused on with our audience. How about we jump right in?
Sure, that would be great. Thank you.
So, Eddie, I'm curious how you came to be the personal and professional version of yourself.
So interestingly, it all started way back when I was at school, because I went to a very large comprehensive school in central London where white was the minority. And I still came out of that school as top girl, despite the fact that I truanted a lot and I really didn't enjoy school at all. And I learned everything about white privilege. At the time, I didn't realize it. But reflecting back on it, as I then progressed through education, I realize now that was an immense experience of white privilege to do as well as I did because I was born to middle-class parents, going to the school that I went to. And so I then progressed through education. I went to Polytechnic. I did business studies because I didn't really do well enough at any single subject to do a specialist degree. And kind of fell into working in industry and then training, and then went on to train as a teacher. And then from teacher moved into higher education and became a lecturer. And then really cemented my career in higher education, did my doctorate, etc. And was then another sort of benefit of white privilege, able to move from the UK to Australia, because it's actually quite easy to get into Australia as a white academic. Whereas it's not so easy to get into Australia otherwise. And so my career in Australia in academia then also blossomed. But I got to the point where I just felt that the system was really not addressing the issues that were important to me, because privilege and equity are really important to me. And I found the approach in Australia and the discussions and arguments around these issues weren't the same, and they were weren't the same to those in Britain. They were, I would say, much further behind in their thinking in the equity agenda. And one of the things that I discovered was that between 25 and 40% of high school students were dropping out of school before they completed school. And I was like, that is like devastating for the future of Australia. And so I left academia and set up my own company, the Inventorium, to look at addressing that issue through trying to develop a system of education that really speaks to every student where they're at and what their needs are. And we cater specifically at the Inventorium for those students who are not suited to mainstream.
First of all, you speak so bluntly, and in America right now, some of the words you're using are absolutely banned. And I want to say thank you. These are terms, ideology, and words I use very frequently. And many folks like us, white people, are afraid to examine their identity and recognize what privilege it brings to their existence. So I very much respect the approach you take and how you have framed the way you've gotten to where you are and what you've built. So I just want to give space for that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm very aware and grateful in many ways for the privilege that I've had, because I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now if I didn't have it, amongst other things. But I do feel it's not a sense of duty or that I owe something, but that I actually want to try and address those issues to um, just to level the playing field as much as possible so that everybody can succeed on their own terms, because it's actually about being a good person and trying hard and working hard and being educated, rather than about what gender you are, what skin color you are, what religion you are, what sexuality. All these things really doesn't matter. It's actually about being a good moral person in a society and contributing to that society in a sustainable way, so that hopefully you are able to give back more than you take.
You're here.
Because that actually is the true meaning of growth. It doesn't just have to be economic growth. You know, if everybody gave back more than they took, then we would be in a society that's absolutely flourishing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, at the end of the day, our societies are based on histories that are complicated and important to recognize, and how we get to where we are sometimes is many times are absolute luck, but also by design of the system. So it's important to acknowledge both. Eddie, I would love for you to tell folks, like, what is Inventorium? What are you doing there with learners, and how are you committed to making sure that education is for all and not just some?
So I started by doing a lot of research into why students were actually dropping out of education. And there are lots of personal issues as to why kids drop out of school, personal circumstances and stuff. But there are some systemic issues in the system that exacerbate those personal issues and make it impossible for them to continue. And if we deal with those systemic issues, then they can actually stay engaged in education. So the three systemic issues that were absolutely key were, firstly, that the pace of learning is wrong for a lot of students. So when you're in a classroom of, say, 20 or 30 students with one teacher, the teacher has to sustain the class at a certain pace in order to get through things. And usually there's a set curriculum and there are year targets that need to be achieved in terms of learning outcomes and stuff. And it's all very set and everybody gets processed in the same way. Now, if you're a young person who's been sick, or you've got issues going on at home, or you've missed a few weeks, or you just find a subject really difficult, it's very easy to get left behind. And then once you start to get left behind, that becomes a downward cycle, because you're then behind the next lesson, the lesson after, the lesson after. And so if you can't keep up, then you disengage from the class. Equally, kids who are super bright and find a subject really easy have kind of like done it all in 10 minutes, and they're then sitting there twiddling their thumbs for the next 50 minutes, not knowing what to do. So while sometimes they can help the other students who are struggling, often you've got both extremes completely bored and disengaged, and you're just teaching a sort of middle band. So that pace of learning is really important. The second thing is that sometimes the students just don't see the relevance in what they're learning. You know, I kind of joke and say, not every kid wants to read Shakespeare. Now, I don't know if it's mandatory in America. It used to be sort of mandatory in schools in Britain that we all
Very
had to
much so. Yes, very
plow
much
through
so.
Shakespeare and the classics. And, you know, and it's like, for some kids, this is just like death to reading. They enjoyed reading when they were kids and younger kids, and they had books that interested them. But to be told you have to read something when it doesn't speak to you and you're struggling with it, and you're not interested in it because you don't see any relevance in the subject matter. And it's not just in English and reading, but a lot of students get put off reading because of this. But also in geography and history, which bits of history people want to look at, it's also set and defined that if a student isn't engaged in it and doesn't see how that's impacting them, and it's not just about the selfishness of something impacting them, but if they can't directly relate to something, they tend not to be that interested in it.
I'm going to cut you off for 2 seconds, and I want you not to forget your third item, which I doubt you will. But The Atlantic, which is one of my favorite publications in the US, just published a very long form piece on the teen disengagement crisis. And it so much speaks about what we put in front of kids and how we think that what we've always done is what we should always do versus being innovative and attentive to kids' needs and their interests. So, just to double click on that, and I'll link this article in my newsletter when I share this podcast, but it really feels relevant to the conversation about what you just said. And I wanted to share it here.
Yeah, thank you. And interestingly, you know, most kids, when they sit and look at YouTube for an hour, they will be delving into things that are really quite interesting and educational. It's just not necessarily what a teacher would decide to teach them. So, but the third thing, and that is the actual teacher, and particularly when kids get to high school, they suddenly have different teachers for different subjects. And even though they may have a base tutor or a form tutor, whatever you want to call it, they don't have one teacher that they're with all day like they are when they're in primary and elementary school. And so there isn't that connection built with a teacher. And unless they're really good or really bad, they tend to just fall through a crack in the middle where nobody really knows them. Nobody gets to know who they are, what they're struggling with, how they're doing in one lesson compared to another, and that whole picture. And so in the Inventorium, we've developed a very unique way of teaching because we kind of figure with the internet, everything you need to know is online. So we do not really teach content, and we have designed a whole system around teaching students how to learn. There are some elements of content, but it's very much about applying learning methods to areas and ideas that are of interest to the student. So the student has one teacher who teaches them for everything, which teachers do struggle with initially, because effectively you are teaching students all the way up to high school graduation, every subject. Only you're not, because we're not teaching them the subject. What we're doing is facilitating their learning of a subject in a way they want to learn it to meet the assessment criteria that they're going to be graded against. So our role as teachers becomes one of facilitating the achievement of learning standards and outcomes in terms of learning processes that we then apply with the students to their areas of interest.
That is very outside the box and the kind of stuff I love, to be candid with you. Can you talk a little bit about a story or an example of a student who has really thrived or embodied the success of this model and kind of what their future held for them?
Sure. So a lot of our students, the one thing that I should have said as well is we teach the students one-on-one, because the only way you can go at a student's pace and make it relevant to them and build that relationship is teaching them one-on-one. And so people might be now thinking, well, that's just not viable. How do you do that? And the answer is we only teach them an hour a week. So the students only get an hour a week with the teacher, and the rest of the time they're studying on their own. That's not unsupervised, they're just studying on their own without teacher direct intervention. And in the hour of that week, they go over the work that they've done the previous week, and it will have been marked and looked at and so discussed with the student, and then setting the agenda for the next week and how they're going to do things. So it's very much a facilitating hour. So the students who have really done well on this, so we have students who so a lot of our students are neurodiverse, and our particularly autistic students will come to us, and they maybe have some PDA, which is a horrible term of pathological demand avoidance.
Yes.
Sounds like which is where when they're told to do something, they immediately react and don't want to do it. So we're always negotiating choices with them and how they want to do things. And so they start to engage because they're the ones with the agency deciding what they're going to do, and we're just offering guidance. So another thing that we do, for example, is we don't set a deadline date on when something's done. They work on it until they're happy with it. And when they're happy with it, then they can show it to us. And then we will give them a rough guide as to what sort of grade it's at, and do they want to try and improve the grade or not, or if it's top grade, you know, just congratulations and let's move on. What's the next thing they'd quite like to look at? So the whole approach to assessment is different as well. And we'll have students who will join us, and we generally will cover the sort of 2 years of high school in those final 2 senior years. we generally, on average, will cover it in 3 years with a student, because they've come to us, they've missed some schooling, there's some catching up to do to start off with, and we've got to get them to the outcome level that's assessed externally and moderated. So our students have to achieve against the same criteria as every other student. And we just don't pressure them to that, because sometimes it's the pressure that's shut them down. So we let them dictate the pace, and we are pushing them to be their best selves and do better work at every point. But they're the ones with the agency on how it's going. So on average, it would take them 3 years to do those 2 years instead of 2 years. But they come out of it as confident learners who've either got employment or are going to go on to university or college in some form, and they have an idea of where they want to be for their future. But as an example, I'd say maybe 60% of our students, when they join us, wouldn't even leave their bedroom. So to get them from that point of sitting in their bedroom doing nothing all the way through, because we're very much a last resort place for parents and schools at the moment, when they really can't get a kid to do anything, not even leave the house, then they tend to send them to us. So actually getting them to that point over 3 years of getting them engaged, going out, engaged in volunteering, work experience, and actually thinking about a career and a future, committing to it, doing the work necessary to get the grades in order to then do that. That's the journey that we take them on.
The differentiation and personalization is so paramount here, and it's, it's a buzzword or buzz terms that you've heard, I'm sure, before in this space. Are these, forgive me for not knowing the answer to this, but are these students earning credit in traditional high school settings, what we call high school in America settings, through Inventorium? And if
Yeah,
so, how?
So in South Australia, the qualification they get is the South Australian Certificate of Education. In Queensland, it's the Queensland Certificate of Education. They're all slightly different. So we work with our students to achieve the credit in that Certificate of Education, whichever one it is. So in Queensland, for example, they have to do a maths test, which we then facilitate as an online test, and we invigilate it one-on-one with the students so they don't feel the panic of being in an exam hall and having to do it. So we meet exactly the same criteria that every other student has to meet for their qualification. We just do it in a different way. And it all does get externally assessed and moderated. So we're not getting any special allowances or anything for our students. It all just goes straight into the system, anonymized by student number. Nobody knows the student's hours, and it all gets moderated nationally as every other students do.
I'm curious what, I don't know the Australian education system as well as I know the US one. In fact, I don't really know it at all. But I'm curious about what structural or policy changes you think you might need to make alternative models like Inventorium more accessible.
So the first thing for me, a big one, is every state in Australia has its own education standards board, curriculum and qualification framework. And every state is funded to put their students through their own standards. Although there is a national standard that they all align to, so it's the same but different. And one of the things that I think would help a lot and be a really big policy change and make everybody much more flexible is if schools could choose which states systems they wanted for each subject area, because that way the schools could actually get some choice. And I think that would then keep the whole curriculum education process really dynamic. So in the UK, they do have this. In the UK, you can choose which exam boards you engage with for which subject areas. So there's like University of London, Oxford and Cambridge. There's lots of different exam boards that have different curriculum and assessment processes, and they're all to a standard, but it's up to you to choose how you do it. So first policy change that I'd love to see in Australia is that flexibility and choice between states, because I think that children are often disadvantaged by having to work within the state system that they're working in. Because Western Australia, for example, I think 75% of the curriculum is set by the state and examined by the state. So there's very little flexibility and freedom, whereas in South Australia, there's pretty much 90% of it is open to teacher direction as to how you're going to implement those standards. So much more flexibility in meeting the students' individual needs and interests in South Australia than Western Australia, for example.
You know, Eddie, you came ready for that answer. So I have another follow-up to that. If you could wave a magic wand and change, just structurally change our education system globally, what would you do?
I think it's a really interesting dilemma as to what to do. What I'd like to try, because I'm always like, you know, until we actually
You like to test. I get it. That's smart. That's
I
smart.
don't know that this is the answer. But for me, in working with these young people, there is something about the core basics needing to be taught on a more personalized level. And personalized learning can only occur one-on-one, or it's not personal. The minute you've got a small group, it's not personal. It's then small group learning, which is fine. And that can go a long way as well. And that's also important. But I think there is, you know, when people talk about back to basics and everyone needs to have the basic, that's fine, that's great. And I agree, everybody should know the basics, fractions, decimals, English grammar, or whichever language they're working in, that, you know, their language is important. But personalizing that at an individual level through some sort of teaching methodology like we do, which doesn't mean the kids all have to be at home learning individually. They just get individual tuition within a group setting, and then they're working on their own. And then having much more focus on the social skills and dynamics and interactions and people actually working together, because I feel that's really been lost at the attempt to cover more knowledge, which is all in the internet anyway. But that actual social process of learning together, of peer evaluation, of giving feedback, which isn't just a like on a Instagram post or making a TikTok video to be impressed and being an influencer. It's actually about thinking about who you are in a group setting, who's lifting you up, who's pulling you down, how are you influencing others, how are you impacting others, and how do you want to do that? How do you want to be seen in society for the rest of your life? These are the sorts of questions that I feel society is breaking down on at the moment, because there's too much pressure to perform rather than to actually work as a society. And that can be about everyone's performance coming together so they can be the best that they are. We don't all have to be great at everything. If we have the right combinations of people, we can be great at different things and function really well together.
My gosh, that's a mic drop moment right there. I love that. I love that. So what's next for Inventorium? What impact do you hope to have, let's say, in the next 5 years?
So we're really looking, now that we feel we've tested our model, got it working, and it's taken us 6 years to get to this point. Got to, just so in case people are thinking, oh my God, she's a lunatic. We started with 10 students because I was so scared. It's so different what we do. I was so scared it wasn't going to work because the design came from the research. In order to address the research issues, we designed the Inventorium, and I was like, this is insane. I don't know if it'll work. So we tried with 10 kids who dropped out of school. So they were not going to get anything if nothing changed for them. We were very, very careful about how we've rolled this out. This year, we started the year with 300 students, and now we're going to move into other states. And we're really kind of honing down the practice of how it works in order to make it a scalable and saleable, but it's not a huge profit business. That's not the aim. But a saleable product that other countries can use to help address this issue. Because nobody's really tackling this issue other than trying to get the kids back into school. But actually getting back into school is not the answer. Getting them back into education is the answer. And once they're back into education, they may find their way back into school. They may not. They may find their way to the next step after school. Because for a lot of them, school is the problem. And schools themselves, I feel, need dramatic changes. Because I go into a school and I almost start to seize up in fear and anxiety. There's a bell goes and suddenly there's kids everywhere. Another bell goes, there's nobody anywhere, and everyone's sat down rigidly behaving, doing something. And I'm like, it feels to me like the closest thing to a prison. Not that I've ever been in a prison, but from what I've seen on TV. You know, I kind of say to the kids, just because you hate school doesn't mean you're going to hate work and real life after school. Just don't get arrested because you're going to hate prison. You know, so it's
But
what is a
we
school
need alternative programs
stimulative?
like Inventorium to ensure that students who are not succeeding in a traditional setting have a place to be successful. And you're proving that that's possible.
Yeah, but I worry as well that the way that schools operate at the moment is conditioning people into a certain form of behavior as well that also sets them up to either succeed or, you know, fail in real life, because there is no real emulation to school in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's too different. Real life after school. It's not like life in school. And so succeeding in that environment doesn't really set you up for success in life. It might set you up with great grades to get into an Ivy League college, but what does that actually do?
Mm. I have so much to say on that question and so many thoughts that are different from my 18-year-old self who wound up going to an Ivy League college. The version of me that thought that was so important is not the same version as me today.
But
Some
it is important to
years
some. And that's also that, you know, I'm not
no,
saying
but
get rid of all
no,
the
but
Ivy League
Eddie, like
colleges. It's about,
Eddie, the
that's the
yeah.
differentiation bit, you know, that's
But
the
Eddie,
differentiation.
I don't think that it like the career I have today didn't matter. My boss dropped out of the same college I graduated from. I'm the COO, he's the CEO. So how necessary was that degree? Okay. Well, anyway, that's a whole other conversation for another time. I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I find myself just nodding my head vigorously as you speak. So, Eddie, I have my final question for you, which is let's picture the teacher who is still in a what we call a brick and mortar school, a traditional school, whether in Australia, England, America, wherever, could be MENA, anywhere. What advice would you give them?
Oh, look, there's two things. I think if they can cope with staying in the system and just inspiring their students to learn, that would be the best thing that they can do. They are going to be judged on grades, and there is a huge pressure to try and get kids to conform to get the grades, whereas actually establishing what the group wants and how they're going to achieve, you're actually likely to get better grades anyway. But it's a leap of faith to do that. And I don't want anyone to get fired on the basis of my advice. But really, ultimately, I would say you need to get out and do your own thing. Because the system's, it's kind of toxic. There are some good schools, there are some great head teachers, and, you know, but the system itself has become toxic because it's become so devolved from reality and real life and what it's preparing people for and the way that it's treating young people. And you know, the system and process, the schools run around timetables. That's it. They run around staffing and timetables. They do not run around students. So when people say to me they do something that's student-centered as a school, I'm like, yeah, no, you don't. You might do
Eddie, don't
something
hold
that
back. I
caters.
love this. I love this take. And honestly, this is the kind of rabble rousing we need right now. I mean, I don't know if you've been following the news, but America's going through it. Our system is changing. I mean, I for now I will just say it's changing, right? Because
Yeah.
remains to be seen what happens. But this is the kind of conversation we need to be having. And I'm so grateful that you came here to have it with me.
Oh, I mean, look, if I was a teacher in America at the moment, I would potentially be looking at finding a fellow group of teachers who feel the way that I do and setting up a mindful school
Yeah.
or a charter school or something. I'd be saying there is you can say there are benefits and disbenefits to what's going on at the moment, but there is an opportunity at the moment for massive disruption in education because nobody quite knows what's going to happen. So in a period of time when nobody quite knows what's going to happen, there's an opportunity to lead the way. And so if I was a teacher in America at the moment, I would hope that I would have the courage to make that leap and just say, right, I'm going it myself. Micro schools as a concept in America is very acceptable. I'd be going that way.
I've had an episode or two talking about the topic, so I'll link those episodes in our newsletter as well. But yeah, Eddie, thank you for not holding back. I love this. I love what you're building. Inventorium sounds like it's really serving some of our most vulnerable learners who absolutely are benefiting from your work. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
No, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for asking such interesting questions.
Oh, that's so kind. I really have to say that it's not often I feel completely compelled to say that you are really shifting the paradigm, and having you here and sharing that on this episode has been important. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to everybody who tuned in today. Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.